So what are the 3 rods that every kayak fisherman wants to have on their boat? Um, if you're like me, I'm a rod junkie, so I have lots of rods. But some guys starting out don't know exactly which rods to get. And these 3 rods will cover 90% of the baits you want to throw from a kayak, or really any other boat at all. Which 3? So let's start out with a rod everyone probably started out fishing with, or at least has a rod of, and that's just a regular old spinning rod. This is a rod I like to get in like a medium with a fast tip or an extra fast tip on it, kind of depending on the models. I get them about 7 feet long. I got the Legend Tournament by St. Croix, fantastic rod. And the line I put on this particular rod is I put 20-pound 8-strand braid, and then I'll put a 12 or 17-pound leader on there. My leaders will run long, sometimes between 3 feet, 4 feet. Really depends how I'm fishing it. If I'm using like a drop shot or something like that, I'll run it smaller. And this rod can do a lot of different stuff for you. Right now it's rigged up with a weightless fluke. You can run it like that with an offset hook. You can put small swim baits on it. Really anything that's really lightweight. Let's say less than a 1/4 ounce or 1/4 ounce and lower. In the winter time, I use these rods a lot to fish for hybrids and stripers in the Ohio River, and I use a 1/4 pound interval swim bait on there. You can put grubs on it. Super versatile rod. You can put crankbaits on it. You can really do anything you want with it. They cast a mile too, especially with that 8-strand on there. 8-strand, 20-pound. I can cast this a mile, so I can cover a lot of water with this. Everyone should have one of these in your boats. Next up, I would say, and my personal favorite rod is having a rod that I run my Texas rig on. I'm a huge Texas rig fan. I love the setup. Worms, creature baits, whatever. I run it a lot of different ways. I put swim baits on there too. And what I run for this particular rod in this setup is I recommend like a medium heavy with an extra fast tip. This one's the Legend X by St. Croix. Super awesome rod. I feel everything with this thing. And I use this rod like 90% of the time, so I do a lot of picking. I call it picking and sticking. So I'm like going into real heavy cover. I'm picking my way through the cover. And it's really nice to have a sensitive rod. So don't go cheap on this particular rod, because you're really going to want to be able to feel what's this tree branch, what's a bite, what's a rock, because you're going to have to key in on stuff like that when you're using this rod to fish. And not only can you use it for a Texas rig, but you can use it for small jigs, up to medium jigs. You're not going to put an ounce jig on something like this. And again, these 3 rods I'm showing you are only going to cover about 90%, 80% of the fishing that is out there. You can always add more rods. But these rods will cover the basics. I put a spinnerbait on this a lot of times too. And it works great as a spinnerbait rod. And so the line I use on this guy is I use 50-pound braid, Suffix, on it to 17-pound leader, kind of depending what I'm doing though. So if I am fishing frogs, which I don't do a lot of frog fishing, but if I was to use this for frog fishing, which you could, it's a little underpowered, but you could, I would run straight braid to it. Or if I'm in heavy vegetation, I'll run straight braid. But most of the time I have some type of leader on there, and I'll run like on my Texas rig setup, as long as it's pretty open, not too heavy of a mat or too much vegetation. I'm going to run a 1/4 ounce, the 3/0 hook on it. Super versatile rod. You can put spinner baits, chatter baits, swim baits, Texas rig, jigs. So this covers a lot of different baits, for that. And then everyone's got to have a good crankbait rod in their arsenal. I can't stress enough, like in the spring and the fall, in the wintertime, how much I use my crankbait rod. I'll start reaching for this before I reach for anything else here shortly. We're kind of late in the summer right now, entering fall, and it's about getting time to start the crankbait rod up again. I personally like the St. Croix Legend Glass with a moderate tip on there. And what the tips mean is a moderate tip is going to bow much deeper down. See that? Much deeper down into the rod. Versus an extra fast tip. See how just the very end of the tip is bending. So you probably have about 10 inches before it kind of straightens out with an extra fast tip versus a moderate tip. And what that does is with that moderate tip, when you hook into a big fish using a crankbait and those treble hooks, keeps them glued to the treble hooks, because what they want to do is they want to unweight the line. And when you have a moderate tip, you got a lot more bow in your rod, so when that fish is fighting and then turns towards you and gives and then pulls and you're reeling and fighting them, it keeps that tension on those treble hooks to keep tension on the fish. And that's how you lose the fish, is when they get that tension off. Like, so they jump out of the water and they start shaking their head, they're losing that tension, they're able to spit the bait. When they're in the water and they're swimming at you, or when you're fighting and they make a hard turn, maybe they'll put a lot of pressure on it and then they make a turn, that's when you're going to lose the fish. The moderate tip helps you keep them on there. And these are the 3 rods that are going to cover 90% of your stuff. Now this particular rod, all I do is crankbait with it. The other 2 rods I showed you, the spinning rod and the medium heavy rod, have a lot of multiple uses. This rod is crankbait only for me. And it's a medium rod with a moderate tip, and whether it's a square bill, a lipless crankbait, deep diver, crankbait only rod. It sounds limiting, but with how much I use the crankbait in the spring and the fall and the winter time, this rod really, it's okay that it just does one thing for me. And that's how it made it into my pick for the 3 rods that everyone should have in their arsenal. You know, and if you're only to pick 3 rods, like let's say you're just starting to get into kayak fishing and you have 1 rod now, you probably have a spinning rod. Well, you go out and get yourself 2 more rods, and you're going to cover 90% of what you got to do and be able to keep up with everybody. You know, you get yourself a medium heavy with an extra fast tip, get yourself a medium rod with a moderate tip, by quality. I mean, I can't tell you how much money I spent on $100 and $150 rods before I kind of wised up and got into a good brand of rods like St. Croix. It's really changed my fishing. It was revolutionary in that regard, getting a quality rod. The sensitivity goes way up, your hook sets are better, you're landing bigger fish, by quality. Buy once, buy quality.